Welcome into the 247 Sports YouTube page. I'm Emily Proud. He's Chris Hummer, and when you see him, you know it's time to do some Week 9 winners and losers. Now, this first one, Chris, was looking like it could have gone either way at the start of the fourth quarter, but it was Ohio State pulling away from Penn State. Now, this was a team win, but Chris, 3 players in particular stood out to you on Saturday.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think when we talk about talent, it's really difficult to sometimes put into words what a talent gap looks like. We know Alabama, Ohio State, and Georgia have more talent than everybody else, but it's not always reflected in the field that way. It's usually depth that makes the difference. You can send waves at people. But for Ohio State, I think Saturday against Penn State proved they just have more game changers than anybody. Obviously, C.J. Stroud is a co-Heisman favorite with Hendon Hooker. He had a very up and down game for a long stretch yesterday. And then he was near perfect in the fourth quarter to have Ohio State make that comeback happen. Marvin Harrison Jr., who I think is the best receiver in the country right now, had 10 catches for 185 yards. He's only the second FBS receiver since 2000 to have that stat line against Penn State. He was awesome. And then JTT, the number 2 overall player in the 2021 class for 247, the defensive end for Ohio State, had one of the most dominant games you'll ever see from a defensive player. He had 2 interceptions, 2 sacks, a forced fumble. He had a tip that led to another Ohio State interception. All 3 of those guys changed the game for Ohio State. And I think it's why Ohio State can erase a deficit against anyone. They have more game changers than anybody in the country. And it's why this is Ohio State's best chance to win a national title since 2014.
Yeah, especially we've been missing that game changer on defense. JTT looking like a Chase Young of old. You know, they've had those defensive guys, but he is really stepping up here. All right, speaking of one quarter being the difference, let me tell you what happened in the third quarter of the Louisville-Wake Forest game. The Cardinals put up 35 points, including 2 pick sixes, forced another interception, and 3 fumbles. Marcus Satterfield said after the game, quote, "I have never seen anything like it." Now, for the most part, Chris, we kind of expected an electric offense for the Cards, but how impressive was that defensive performance?
It's exactly what Louisville needed. Coming into the season, I thought Louisville might be a dark horse ACC contender. They had the offense. Everybody knows that. Malik Cunningham leading a group that's been in the top 10 for years now in terms of yards per play. The defense has been a problem throughout Scott Satterfield's tenure. And this is the first time we saw the defense step up and win Louisville a game. Wake Forest came into the week having turned the ball over 5 times all year. Louisville turned them over 8 times in the second half. It was that type of day for Louisville's defense and that type of day for Wake Forest, obviously. And this is just a huge, huge win for Scott Satterfield. Few coaches had a hotter seat than he did. Only a couple weeks ago, there were a lot of rumors in coaching circles that he might not return in 2023. But he's turned the table, and this is the first top 10 win for Louisville since Lamar Jackson was on campus. Louisville's 5-3 with some really big opportunities ahead of it. And Louisville looks like a completely different team than it was only a couple weeks ago.
Yeah, big sigh of relief for Scott Satterfield. Your third winner is North Carolina after handling Pitt 42-24. Now, that's all I'm going to say about it because you wrote that Drake Maye is the best quarterback in the ACC. Tell me why.
I think he is. Like, there's some really good ones in the ACC. Sam Hartman, Devin Leary, Jordan Travis is playing excellent football. But nobody's putting up stats quite like Drake Maye, and nobody looks like Drake Maye. I think a lot of us wondered how UNC would replace Sam Howell coming into the season. And Drake Maye, who was a 5-star quarterback in the 21-21 class for us, is playing better than Sam Howell ever did at any point in his career for North Carolina right now. I think Drake Maye is a future first-round pick. I think Drake Maye is going to be right there with Caleb Williams and Quinn Ewers in 2024 in terms of the QB1 to be taken. And he's playing, I would say the best ball of his career. It's obviously very early, but he's elevated North Carolina's ceiling, which is surprising given that UNC's defense has been a problem. USC really can't run the ball all that well, but Drake Maye has been that good for the Tar Heels. They're undefeated in the Coastal right now. They look very likely to be the ACC championship pick for the Coastal to go up against Clemson, and Mac Brown's like totally turned around his tenure because of his QB1.
Yeah, especially considering all the great quarterbacks in the ACC this year. That is a bold statement, but a fair one. Well, someone's got to lose, and no one said you had to lose in historic fashion, though. Looking at you, Oklahoma State, the Pokes suffering a 48-0 loss at the hands of Kansas State with a backup quarterback. Now, Will Howard was spectacular, but this is the loser segment here. Chris, how does a top 10 team like this lose?
I don't have a rational explanation for it. That was shocking. It's one of the most shocking results of the year in college football. You can make excuses for Oklahoma State. They're pretty banged up right now. Multiple starters out because of injury. Spencer Sanders isn't 100% quite yet either, but you can't lose 48-0 to Kansas State on the road. You can't have it happen. This was a critical game in the Big 12 standings. Kansas State just jumped Oklahoma State with this victory. They have the tiebreaker and what's going to be a very tight Big 12 championship game race with TCU at the top of it right now. Oklahoma State had won 8 of its last 10 games against ranked competition. They had lost the only other 2 games in that stretch by a total of 9 points. This came totally out of nowhere. It was just a complete no-show by Oklahoma State. And I think Mike Gundy said it best, and he said, we got our butts kicked.
Certainly, yeah, it's an excuse, the injuries, to lose a game, but not lose quite like that. Well, Boston College has dropped 3 straight and failed to score a touchdown in 2 of those losses, but none more embarrassing than Saturday's 13-3 loss to UConn. It was the Huskies' first ever over the Eagles. Ever. It was their first win over a Power 5 team in 6 years. This is a really banged up squad, like we said about the last one. But how close is BC to rock bottom under Jeff Hafley?
I think they might be there. You lose to UConn, you're probably there at this point. UConn's been the worst team in the FBS for the last 5 years. Credit to Jim Mora and true freshman quarterback Zion Turner. They've done an amazing job at UConn this year. It looks like a completely different program. But if you're Boston College, you can't lose to UConn. This is just one of those games where it completely alters the way we look at a program. And it wasn't too long ago that Jeff Hafley was one of the hottest names in college football coaching circles. He looked destined for a bigger Power 5 job sooner rather than later. Now he's 2-6. Boston College is staring at only its 2nd losing season since 2013. 7-win seasons got Steve Adazio fired at Boston College not too long ago. In year 3, Jeff Hafley seems very far away from ever getting to that 7-win mark. As you said, injuries have played a really big part in this. Boston College is super banged up. Its offensive line is a mess. Phil Yurkovich has been under fire all year. But you just can't lose to UConn. This is a game, if you're an ACC team, you have to win. And it's one of the worst losses of the year in college football.
Yeah. All right. Well, just 7 weeks ago, we were propping up Kalani Sitake's squad following a win over a top 10 Baylor team. Now they're riding a 4-game losing streak with back-to-back L's over non-Power 5 opponents. Chris, how have the recent performances from the Cougs changed your perception of their readiness to join the Big 12 next year?
BYU is going to be in a really difficult position next year. We saw them make their run in 2020, obviously with Zach Wilson, but they did that playing a schedule that didn't include any Power 5 teams because of the pandemic. They beat multiple Pac-12 teams last year in a down year for the league, but I think we're seeing a bit of a peek in what it's going to look like for BYU to transition to the Big 12 and play quality competition week in and week out. We've seen BYU not only lose to Liberty this year, but they've gotten beaten pretty handily by Arkansas. We saw East Carolina beat them in American school. It's going to be tough sledding for BYU next year until it manages to recruit up. BYU, like the other teams we mentioned here, also injured. Jaron Howell had a really tough game, one of the worst of his career. But long term, if you're just thinking about how BYU is going to fit in the Big 12, I think it's going to be a bit of an adjustment for them for the first couple of years as they recruit up, and this is an example of that.
Awesome. Chris, thank you so much. Go check out his college football overtime piece right now on 247sports.com. Also, be sure to like, share, and subscribe to the 247 Sports YouTube page.